Hello there. Today, going to be making some scatter terrain featuring some monster nests and some eggs. To start with, I grabbed some foam core for the base, and then using a pencil, sketched on the rough shape of the piece. I then added a buffer area around it, so I could bevel the edge and get the sizing right. Then, using a knife, I cut the bases out. For some larger rock formations, I grabbed some blue styrofoam and cut it into roughly triangular pieces. Then, using a scrunched up tinfoil ball, I pushed some stone texture into the outside. You can also pick at the styrofoam with your fingers and get some nice organic rock shapes that way, or use the edge of a sculpting tool to get some kind of ridges in the formation. I repeated this process a few times, using mostly the picking technique to get these nice weird looking rocks. I then built up some layering on the base using some torn up insulation flooring board, just to add a bit more elevation onto the piece. Then, using hot glue, I attached the rock formations onto the base. I also used some of the offcuts to bulk up the base and add a few smaller rocks around there. This is also a good time to cover up any big gaps between the base and the rock formations. To make the eggs for the nest, I took some regular air drying clay. I then rolled it into two spheres and then squished it slightly so you would get a nice egg shape. I varied the size up so you get a few larger eggs and a few smaller ones as well. While those were drying, I noticed some of the rock formations didn't look quite right, so I went in and I picked some more styrofoam out, so it would blend better between the styrofoam rocks where they'd been glued together. The next step was to mix up a batch of sculptor mold, using about 1 part mixture to 1 part water, then stirring it up with a sculpting tool before applying it over the gaps and the base of the piece. I also used it to weld the rock formations together where there was a gap between it. This applies quite lumpy at first, but if you wait until it dries partly, you can wet your finger and then smooth it out and get a nice clean finish to it. So using it while it's still quite liquid, just pushing it into the gaps and then using the flat edge of a sculpting tool to smooth it through. Then, while it's still wet, pushing some of the eggs in. Now, even if these don't fully set, they will give a nice guideline hole later where you can just put a bit of glue in and reattach them. For the first piece, I wanted a large cluster of eggs just partly submerged in the sand. So with some of the larger eggs in the middle and then layering out the medium and smaller eggs, I started pushing them into the sculptor mold. Waiting 24 hours for that to dry, then mixing up a texture paste made of sand, PVA, black gesso and cork flock. I applied this over the base to add some texture, and also pushed it half into the base of the eggs, so it would make them look a bit more submerged. Then if you want to, you can add a few aquarium rocks before it dries, which is then followed by a layer of black gesso over the rest of the piece. And for the second one, I wanted kind of spider eggs, so I just took two of the larger ones and glued them opposite each other in between this kind of crag. With the black gesso done, it was time for a layer of umber brown, hitting the eggs and the terrain at the same time. Mixing about 3:1 parts white to the umber brown from earlier made a pale tan, and applied a layer of that over the piece next. The final step was to take white paint and hit the very highlights of the ridges. For the colour of the eggs, I used a peach colour as the base layer. And I wasn't too bothered about hitting the entirety of the eggs, because most of it would be covered by sand and dirt anyway. For an extra touch of detail, I took some red paint and dabbed a few dots using a very fine tipped brush on the top of the eggs. Which makes the eggs a bit more interesting to look at, compared to the nearby rocks. Moving back to the spider eggs, I wanted them to have a kind of organic covering. So I had this Halloween cobweb decoration, which is pretty much just nylon webbing, and mixing some PVA and water just so it's slightly diluted and will soak up easier. I then cut the webbing into small pieces, which makes it a lot easier to work with. Taking a piece, soaking it in the PVA mixture, and then applying it on top and around the eggs. If you wanted to, you could go really over the top with this, put the webbing everywhere, but I just wanted the eggs to look kind of lumpy and spider-like. You can also add some paint to the PVA mix if you want to dye the colour of the webbing, which I do in more detail on the floating tech cube build. And this gives you the nice kind of lumpy egg texture you get when it's covered in webbing. So when it dries, it gives quite a lovely effect. But anyway, there we have it. 2 ways to build some scatter terrain, with some monster eggs included, so they can double up as objectives, or potentially hazardous areas on the map. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you next time.